Hello and welcome to a new Leela game from CCC 10. Actually, the event had to be restarted because of some GPU issues. They had to replace one of them, and the organizer decided to restart the event. So this is now a game, game 67 from CCC 10 qualification second edition. And in this one, Leela is playing black versus Rofchade. And there are many games between engines where they play the King's Indian Sämisch and the wins usually come from white. But let's see how Leela managed to win here actually with black. The game started with d4, and after knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7. These are the starting moves of the King's Indian. And after e4 and d6 we have f3. The Sämisch variation of the King's Indian. This is the most aggressive try for white, in which he's trying to get in a kingside attack with h4 and so on, h4, h5. And in this position of the castles, the main move is bishop e3. This is what white usually plays here. And here now black has the option to play e5, which in many cases, after white plays d5 and closes the center, allows black to get in f4 and get a kingside attack with f4 and so on. So in this game, instead of bishop e3, we have another one, bishop g5. And this is called the Steiner Attack. And the point of the move here is that e5 now is not possible because of the pin on the knight. For example, here after d takes, white can take on d8, and after the rook recaptures, white has this very strong knight d5, attacking this knight now twice, and the knight is pinned to the rook. So if knight takes, then black just loses the exchange and it's game over. But how can you defend the knight then? Well, rook d6 fails to knight c7, losing the other rook. And black can maybe try knight d7 here, where white can still win the pawn on c7 with knight c7, but much stronger. Here is rook d1, renewing the threat with knight f6 winning a piece, since this knight now is pinned to the rook on d8. So this is not a good way to play here for black with e5. That's why instead of e5, black usually tries c5 here and tries to fight for the dark squares in the center like this. And here now, let's say after d5, we can see how these pawns are nicely attacking these dark squares. And here, after d5, black can even continue putting pressure on white center with e6 and so on. But in this game, instead of c5, we have another idea with a6. And black's idea is to play b5. He's anticipating the white king going queenside. And then black wants to open the b file or the a file and get an attack on the white king. And indeed now, after queen d2, knight d7 and long castles, grandmasters mostly played here c6 with the idea of b5 and opening some lines. But in this one, Leela chose to play b5. I forgot to mention that after long castles, we reached the end of the book. So from here on, the engines are on their own. And Leela chose to play here b5 directly, without c6. And she's basically investing a pawn. She's sacrificing a pawn for a tempo and to open lines quickly. And white can win. Actually, white can win this pawn by taking here and then taking with the bishop. But it's not worth it for white at all, because for that pawn, now the b file and the a file are open, and black can maybe build an attack there. Much stronger for white is to actually play e5 and attack this knight and drive him away from his best place, the square on f6. From f6, this knight is also eyeing the h5 square, and it's not allowing white to get in the h4, h5 attack so easily. But now after e5, the knight has to leave. Taking here this pawn is not a good idea, because the knight is pinned to the queen, and still can take on e5. The knight still has to go away, so taking on e5 is not good. And if the knight goes to h5, then of course it gets trapped with g4 and it will be lost. So best is to go actually back with the knight to e8. And this has been played before between Jans and Hushenbeit. Jans managed to beat Hushenbeit with bishop h6 and so on. Hushenbeit, Niklas Hushenbeit, actually has a YouTube channel and you can go check him out. In this game though, instead of bishop h6, and instead of taking this pawn, white can take this pawn again here, but it's still not worth it. Much better is just to continue the attack with h4. This is what Rofchade played. Especially that taking here for Leela and opening the b file is just too slow for black. It's just not working. White can immediately attack with h5, and after knight b6, which is given by Stockfish as the best move, there's h takes on g6, h takes on g6, and in this position g4 is very, very strong. This queen wants to go to the h2 square and then mate on h7. And here black doesn't have many options. Best is just to play f6 and allow this king to hide on f7 and maybe challenge white on the h file with the rook. But here the simple bishop e3 is very, very strong. But even queen c2 with the idea of giving up the bishop for the g6 pawn and for the attack is also very strong for white. For example, after queen takes on g6 here, the idea with rook d2, rook h2 and rook h8 mate is very, very strong. So b takes on c4, not good enough for black, but what can then Leela do? Because this attack with h5, bishop h6, exchange the bishops, take on g6, play queen h6 and then mate on h7. This is a very effective and very fast idea here for white. Well, there is this rule that if you are attacked on the flanks, then counterattack in the center. And this is exactly what Leela did in this game, but not by taking this pawn on e5. This wouldn't be good, even though it seemingly wins a pawn with bishop e5. This is not the way to do it. The pressure down this d file is just too strong, and white even has here queen d5, attacking both the bishop and the rook. And even though black can save some of his bacon with bishop takes on c3, this is not good for black. This is not the way to do it. Leela found a much better way, and that is to play c5 in this position and undermine the e5 square. And the point is now that if this pawn takes on c5, then the knight can take on e5. And if this pawn takes on d6, then the other knight can take on d6. And this now looks good for black. These knights are very, very active. This bishop is also active, it came to life. And even though it seems like there's pressure still here down the d file, and maybe white can get in c5 and attack this pinned knight, well, this backfires for white after knight b7, where the knight not only attacks c5, but also defends the queen and allows black to challenge white on the d file. And it might seem that white wins this e7 pawn after taking the queen and exchanging the rooks and knight d8. It looks like bishop e7 might be good for white, but it's not true, because black has knight b7 attacking this pawn, and black's idea is now to play knight c6 attacking this bishop, and this bishop comes to life, and this bishop will come out with pressure on white's queen side, and this rook will come into the game, and actually the game is turning in black's favor. So taking on c5 is not good, and taking on d6 is also not good, because after this and knight takes, black again has a good position here. Strongest here for white is knight d5 with an immediate attack on the e7 pawn, and after rook e8, g4, bishop e6, now the knight can take on e7 because white is double attacking the d6 knight and he gets back his piece. But after rook e7, bishop takes, queen takes, and queen takes on d6, black again can avoid the queen exchange with queen a7. And look at these bishops. These bishops are just very strong. The knight is in a very aggressive position. Rook c8 could come, and this king on c1 doesn't feel so safe. This actually would be better for black. So actually taking any of these pawns on c5 or d6 is not good for white. So Rofchade here went for the better option, and that is knight d5, immediately attacking this pawn on e7. And best here for black, and actually the only option, is to play f6 and block the bishop's attack of e7. But this now allows pawn takes, and after knight takes and d takes on c5, the knight can take. And temporarily, it looks like black has two central pawns here versus white's 0. But white now can take on f6, and here Leela decided to take back with the pawn. And after bishop e3, it looks like white has a very good position. He's even threatening to win a piece because this pawn on d6 is pinned to the queen. But of course Leela didn't go into this variation because it's bad. It went into this variation because it's good for her. And that now is proven by this very nice move. Queen e7, attacking the bishop and not allowing white to take on d6. So Rofchade here continued his attack with h5. And to this Leela now replied rook e8, attacking this bishop for a second time and forcing it to move. Rook e1, defending the bishop, of course, not a very good idea because this bishop would be in a pin. So the bishop has to go, and it decided to go to f4, where it again threatens to win a piece, this knight on c5. And this pawn cannot be defended. It's attacked 3 times, defended only once. So what can Leela do? Well, she decided to push this pawn and shield the d6 square. And now Rofchade took on g6 and then took on d5 with the queen, with check. And there aren't many squares here for Leela's king. A lot of squares are taken away. And actually f8 is the only square where the king can go. But there's also this option with bishop e6 blocking the check with tempo. And here actually Rofchade has to be careful, because removing the queen from the attack and trying to get in again bishop d6 and winning the knight is actually not good for white. This would backfire again after the same knight b7 idea, guarding d6 and also allowing Leela to challenge the d5 with rook d8. This again would turn into black's favor very soon. So instead of queen d4, Rofchade went for the counterattack with bishop d6. She's now also attacking Leela's queen. And after they exchange queens, Leela played here knight a4. Taking the bishops would transpose after knight a4. So in the game we have knight a4 first, and then they take each other's bishops. And now Rofchade played here knight h3, allowing the rook to defend this bishop. In some cases, rook e1 could be dangerous and winning this bishop. So knight h3. Rofchade has to be careful. b3 here, attacking this knight would be a big mistake because of knight c3. Attacking the rook and also attacking the d1 square, not allowing this rook to go back and defend the bishop. And after something like rook d2, rook e1 would be very dangerous. And even though Rofchade can win this knight after the rook takes the bishop, this wouldn't be a fun game for white after f5 check, king c2, b takes, and now the king is just too exposed. This bishop is cutting through the board like a knife. There are many squares taken away from this king. This other rook can join the party, and the king is just too exposed. This wouldn't be a good idea for Rofchade. So instead of b3, he played knight h3, and now we have f5. And again, b3 would be bad, because now after knight c3, this knight is even defended by the bishop. It's true that now this bishop is also defended by this rook, but rook e1, regardless, would be very strong here. After the rook moves somewhere, rook e1 check, king c2, and rook a1 would be very good for black. This bishop is pinned, rook a2 comes with check. This is not fun for white at all. So instead of b3 again, instead of saving the pawn, Rofchade went for the counterattack with rook d6. He's eyeing this g6 pawn. Leela now continued with rook e1 check, king d2, and now after rook b1, she's trying to take here with the rook, so finally Rofchade decides to save the pawn. But now instead of knight c3, the knight went to c5, and we can see how a lot of squares again are taken away from this king and is just too exposed. The other rook will join the party, and there would be 1, 2, 3, 4 menacing pieces attacking the white king. So Rofchade here decided to run with the king to the king side, where it would be much safer behind these two pawns. So after king e3 and check, played king f2, and now after rook b2, king g1. But now came bishop e5, attacking the rook and also taking away some very important squares from the white king. And now after rook takes on g6 and king f7, Rofchade played rook c6, is attacking the knight, and I'm not sure taking here on g6 was a very good idea for Rofchade, because now this allows the other rook to put pressure on the white king side. Here now Rofchade's idea is to play b4, and after the knight leaves, takes also on a6, so he's trying to grab some pawns, but in the same time the pressure builds against the white king. We now have bishop d4 check, and after king h2 we have first rook g8, and after b4, knight e6 and rook takes on a6, we now have another check with the bishop, and after king g2, knight d4, and black is threatening quite simply mate in 1 with knight takes on f3 check. And white's position is just not good at all. Look at this rook that should have, participate in a kingside attack. It looked like he's going to be a star in a kingside attack on Leela's king. Is now grounded here on the h1 square, and it's pretty passive there. How does Rofchade now defend this mate on f3? Well, he came up with an ingenious, I would say, plan to drop back this rook into the defense, and after a couple of checks, he drove the black king to the d file. And now that since this king is on the d file, he now dropped back the rook to a3 to defend this pawn, not allow knight f3 mate. And after the knight attacked the rook, he now gave this check. Very nice play here by Rofchade, very nice idea. And after the king moved away, he now dropped back the rook to d2 to defend the second rank and also pin this knight. The rook is defended by the bishop, but if this knight leaves, then Rofchade could alleviate the pressure by exchanging a pair of rooks. A very nice maneuver here by Rofchade. The game now continued with b takes on c4, and white's position is not that easy still. After bishop takes and rook b1 check, we have bishop back, and now knight e3, attacking this bishop now twice, and it's not so easy to defend. For example, rook f2 would be a bad way to defend the bishop. Pause the video if you would like to find Leela's next move here. This is a mate in 2. Alright, are you ready? So here the move is rook f1 check, deflecting the rook. And now since the g2 square is not defended, rook g2 delivers a nice mate. So rook f2, not enough. Here the only move is actually king f2, allowing this rook to defend the bishop. But now came f4, cementing this very aggressive knight on e3, and now making use of the fact that this pawn has to defend the knight. Rofchade played here g4 and created a protected pass pawn. This pawn of course can't take because it has to guard the knight. And even though Rofchade still believed in equality in this position, there's no equality at all, and this is now proven by Leela with rook h8 by pinning this knight, and now both minor pieces here are pinned to this rook on h1. And white is pretty much in Zugzwang here, even though he still has moves. He doesn't have very useful moves, and Leela can continue building the pressure. Here now after a4, king b8, g5, Leela played bishop c3 attacking the rook, and there aren't many good options here for white. for example, trying to maintain this rook on the second rank backfires after bishop e1. And if the king goes to g1, then bishop g3, with again attacking this bishop, is just not an option. And after king e2, we can see that there are a lot of squares taken away from the king. The only square available is d3. But now after knight d5, the knight is threatening to take on b4 and take away the last square available to that king. And then rook e8 would be just quite simply a mate. So white doesn't have a choice, has to get out of that box with king d3, but this now allows knight b4, forking the king and the rook, and black wins. So rook a2 not good. And trying rook e2, trying to guard the e1 square, is also not enough, because now this rook is overloaded. His attack is defending both minor pieces, but it's overloaded. The rook can now take on h3, and of course if the rook takes, then this is just mating 1, and if the bishop takes, well, then white drops this rook on h1, and this is just completely winning position for black. So what can white do then? Well, Rofchade here evaluated that best is actually to take this pawn on f4 and give up this rook like this. And now the game continued with rook d8 check. And here Leela has to be careful, very, very careful, because if she plays king c7, she drops the game. Actually, she drops the win with knight e6 check. And she has to be very careful not to go to the c6 square. The c6 square is a no-go zone here for the king, because then after bishop b5 check, this would be even winning for white after a very long sequence that I ain't gonna show now. So the c6 square not available, the king has to go somewhere else, but then this is just a perpetual, no matter where the king goes, can't escape the checks with the rook, and this is now just a draw. So king c7, not a good idea, but king b7 keeps the winning chances alive. The game now continued with bishop d3, saving the bishop. And now after rook b2 check, Leela is giving up this e3 knight, but it's only temporarily, because now after king takes and bishop d2 check, the king has to go to e4, and now Leela wins back the knight and also this pawn with rook b4 check. And in this position after king e6, Leela is up a rook versus 3 slow pawns, but winning this is still not easy at all. They now played a lot of moves. Leela is trying to fix those pawns with bishop g7 and so on, and then tries to attack them, but it's not easy at all. One idea is to get with the king closer to one of these pawns. For example, the king could get closer to this pawn by moving to b4 or a5 and then try to win it down. And this is exactly what will happen. Leela will combine an attack on the g6 pawn with an attack on the a4 pawn. Here the rook attacks this pawn, and after a couple of more moves, the king will eventually get to the b4 square, attacking this one. And after rook c4 check, king a5, and rook c5, Leela now played rook b6, attacking this pawn twice and trying to win it. But now came bishop e8, defending this pawn with check, and after king b4, Rofchade went for a rook exchange with rook b5. I'm not sure this was the best idea, but of course you can't judge their moves. They are very strong engines. But there is this rule that if you're down an exchange, then try to hang on to your only remaining rook. Anyway, Rofchade here went for the rook exchange, and this is still not easy for black at all. But now the king is rushing towards the king side, and Leela is combining now attacks on both of these pawns. And here after king e7, this bishop has to decide which pawn to defend, and he went to e6, but now this drops the b5 pawn. And this is still not easy at all for black. You can't just sack your rook for this bishop, because then that's just a draw. Black doesn't have pawns. So it's not so easy to win. The technique to win this is probably to combine a mating attack on the white king with an attack on the f5 pawn. So try to drive the king down into a corner and combine a mate with the rook and the king and the bishop, and in the same time try to take this pawn. But in this move, in this position here, after king e7, Rofchade played bishop c4, and this now ends the game because there's rook c3. Maybe there was nothing better actually, but now the point is that now after rook c3 the bishop is pinned and the king has to defend it, and now after king f6 white can defend this pawn on f5. The bishop can go here or here, and of course king e4 just drops the bishop, so there's no way to defend the pawn. And after bishop back, Leela played rook f3, still guarding these squares which would allow the bishop to defend the pawn. And now after bishop g2 we have check, and after king c4 we have another check, and then Leela takes the other pawn. And from here on now it's really easy. This is now just driving the king into a corner and then mating it. And this is exactly what will happen very, very soon. Rofchade will have to give up the bishop. Here now after this check, the bishop drops back to defend the check, to defend the mate actually, but now there's bishop h4 check, forcing the king away, and here now the white king gets mated after a couple of more moves. What a nice game again by Leela. She was attacked ferociously on the king side, but by creating counter chances in the center she managed to turn the game around, and the hunted became the hunter, and she just went for Rofchade's king and eventually won. Noteworthy again that she managed to immobilize again one of her opponent's rooks. The rook on h1 was just a spectator again in this game, and eventually was even lost. A very, very nice game. Please subscribe, like and share, and check out some of the other games. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.